and let us all do we can to build a better future.
Some time ago, when I talked about how Peter Dow made a tone-deaf tweet about Chicago, I brought up the fact that they were building a camp to house migrants, 2,000 migrants on the south side of Chicago. Now, this facility that was being used or was being proposed was a toxic site filled with all sorts of lovely, dangerous chemicals and dangerous metals in which those migrants would be around. And the residents of Chicago, all across the city, they don't want a migrant camp or shelter in their neighborhoods. The sanctuary cities were ill-prepared. The sanctuary cities were never on point. And there's been massive pushback across a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago, from the south side to the north side, and being vocally upset at the politicians who, for a long time, ignored Chicagoans. I mean, 54 Chicago public schools are still shut down. Half the mental health facilities shut down. We have lead in our drinking water. We have unchecked corruption. Yes, Chicago has a lot of problems, including violence too. But I want to, just for context, just so you guys know what's going on. This took place. I want to give a shout out to Jamal Green, who shared this out. Now, this video that I'll be playing was before the announcement was made. So let's go ahead and play it here real quick.
Well, construction is underway on a massive new migrant winterized tent complex in Brighton Park.
And it comes even though neighborhood opposition is still strong. WJN Sean Lewis live in Brighton Park with more. Sean?
Yeah, Ray and Lourdes, this is to be the first of those winterized tent sites in the city of Chicago. Now, neighbors here in Brighton Park on the southwest side of Chicago say they are concerned primarily over two reasons. First, that fast influx of new arrivals into this neighborhood. And second, they believe that the soil here is contaminated.
Now, if you are new to Chicago or Chicago politics, many neighborhoods on the south and west side of Chicago have industrial facilities or were built upon industrial facilities, the remnants of that. And there's a lot of pollution and ongoing pollution on the south and west side neighborhoods of Chicago. And in many ways, a lot of these industrial facilities do get taken down, only for said neighborhoods to be gentrified. But that's a story for another day. But it's an insidious tactic because the city is going through this massive overhaul, removing generations of people who lived in Chicago, all the while our neighborhoods are still polluted. And the neighbors in this area of Chicago gave a heads up, as well as so many others, to Mayor Brandon Johnson administration about the dangers of this spot. The city was never prepared to live up to the term of being a sanctuary city. It didn't have what it took. Our politicians lied. There were no resources, and people are out there still in the cold suffering. It gets cold in Chicago in December. I've been living here for quite some time, as has my entire family for generations, since my great-grandfather. This city gets cold.
This view from above shows work well underway at 38th in California. For weeks now, since the plans for a tent camp to be built on this former industrial land went public, community members protested the decision. Upwards of 1,500 people seeking asylum will be housed here.
I think residents of Brighton Park and McKinney Park did not have a proper legal representation.
This is just a bad plan.
Longtime critics of the housing plan say that the camps are taking advantage of working class communities.
I look across and see millions and millions of dollars that we're spending. And the fact that they're using this money and this urgency to give people from other countries inhumane conditions at that, it just makes no sense.
Now, that's Jamal Green. I've interviewed him before. He ran not once but twice for mayor of the city of Chicago. And here's what happened recently. Because the governor of Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker, says state says no to tent camp for migrants on contaminated Brighton Park site. The land is contaminated. It is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of contamination in Chicago. Hey, want me here to make it worse? Residents in Chicago, many homes still have lead pipes connected to their houses. And so that's where they get their drinking water. You think the city of Chicago is going to help you out removing those lead pipes? No. No, they'll come by and remove it, but you just got to pay them. You got to pay for it out of your own pocket. The hits just keep on coming. A controversial plan to house up to 2,000 asylum seekers at vacant Brighton Park lot will not move forward due to environmental concerns, the state of Illinois announced Tuesday. Wow. Hey, what about some of these other industrial facilities that are polluting neighborhoods on the south side? Can we get rid of those? The decision comes after the Illinois EPA, I'm surprised they took action, conducted a thorough review of an environmental report of the site released by the city Friday. They know these reports. The Illinois EPA, don't act like you did your homework. You already have it. Mayor Brandon Johnson, whose administration is just as worse, in my opinion, as Lightfoot's office last week, said the report cleared the site for temporary residential use, but construction was halted Monday until further sign-off from the state. The Illinois EPA cited concerns related to insufficient soil sampling and remediation. Given the significant time required to conduct additional sampling to process and analyze results and to implement corresponding further remediation, the state will work with the city to identify alternate shelter options, Pritzker's office said in a statement. In a statement released after this story was published, Johnson's office defended their decision to move forward with the construction at the site. The city contracted Terracon Consultants Incorporated to conduct a field investigation under a sampling plan that was developed for this specific site in accordance with emergency response protocol under the Illinois Emergency Management Act, according to the press release. Per the findings, the city conducted remediation work, which included both the removal of contaminants and the introduction of new materials to eliminate safety risk for individuals who reside in temporary residential housing. So the alderman of the 12th Ward, whose ward includes Brighton Park site, said Tuesday she was pleased with the move from the governor's office. Ramirez has been against the tent camp due to concerns from neighbors and a lack of comprehensive discussion of the long-term environmental effects of people living on the land could face. Despite the tent plan being halted, Ramirez said she's committed to making her ward a welcoming neighborhood for migrants. As much as I want to say Chicago is welcoming everybody, this whole situation of migrants coming to Chicago, just like we've seen in New York City, is being met with pushback from all residents. I played earlier on the show yesterday how there are black voters calling for Trump and independent candidates to come to Chicago so they could speak with them because they are upset with Brandon Johnson's office. Bryan Park Neighborhood Council, a community group that's criticized the lack of communication from the city on the tent plan, also applauded the state's decision to cancel the camp. We are thankful that the state and city are prioritizing the health and safety of the new arrivals, especially the children that would have been living there, the group said in a statement Tuesday. I want to pull up this video here from Jamal Green. I think it's important that we hear this because there is a migrant crisis in Chicago. So let's play it.
And this is about the migrant tent camps. I am utterly sickened that even when the Democratic governor and mayors say, hey, we'll welcome these people in, you don't even have a place for them. That makes it even worse because you didn't even have a place for the 65,000 people that are homeless in the city of Chicago, but yet you're trying to find a place for the 22,000 migrants that have come here. That's ass backwards again. And then what's worse is that instead of say we can't take anymore, instead of say we're going to put a cap on the amount of people that's coming to the city, instead of say let's keep these buses rolling to a city that can take them, you're going to build tents in the winter, in the cold, on contaminated soil. So you can sit here and act like we care about migrants when you really care about your political agenda to create a new voter base for the Democratic Party. Now, the reality is...
He's not wrong. See, the problem in Chicago is that many Chicagoans, because people say, oh, well, Chicago has a city government it deserves. Not necessarily. The game is rigged from the start, okay? There's a long, sad history of corruption. Read the book American Pharaoh. Or if you haven't read the book, I mentioned this before, Chicago's not broke. This city is intertwined and unfortunately connected to the parasitic element called the Democratic machine. And even before the Democratic machine came into full power, there was a city council. We're called the Windy City for a reason. Our politicians are inherently corrupt, and there is organized systems in place in which make sure that we have dynastic politicians who stay in power. Now, eventually, they all meet their ends sooner or later through going to jail or dying in office or resigning because they're just so corrupt. But Chicago, the people of Chicago, are burnt out by electoral politics. Voter turnout, especially in the previous 2 mayoral elections, have been at an all-time low. So how do you fix that, especially if the machine needs the participation of voters? You build a new voting base. Plus, when you gentrify neighborhoods, you redistrict the areas. You incentivize other people who are coming in to replace the old guard, the old people, the previous generations who know too well how corrupt these politicians are. Chicago's done it before, and they're still doing it today. It's been happening since my great-grandfather was born in the city. It's going to happen long after I'm 6 feet under. Chicago has a corruption problem, and someday it should be fixed. The city is filled with good people, and I'm noticing more people are speaking out. Perhaps there will be a change sooner rather than later.
Is that this migrant tent camp was a terrible idea from the beginning. It's a terrible idea where Garda World, who has the contract to build these tents, is the same company that they use to transport migrants from other cities. So they are transporting migrants to the cities and building tent camps and getting $31 million a month to run these tent camps. Garda World, this is a backroom deal to continue taking taxpayer dollars for the very people that are in office. Our elected officials are getting are backdooring us, taking our dollars, giving money to these contractors. Why, if you care so much about the city of Chicago, why couldn't you give a contract to the residents of the city of Chicago to build some housing for the migrants or build some tent camps? But yet you give an out-of-town company tens of millions of dollars to come into Chicago where they transported the migrants in the first place.
It's happened, and it's still ongoing. Our city is so corrupt that it will allow outside forces, private groups, private institutions to capitalize and profit off of the ongoing suffering of people living in Chicago. And this is all aspects. I mean, this isn't the first time Chicago hired a private institution or company to take away something from the people, right? But there's a bigger picture here, and that is the city government has no plan whatsoever for the migrants. They're not going to help. They have no plan to ensure that the migrants have a place to work, a place to live, or send their kids to school. And at the same time, too, as gentrification and cost of living rises in this city, people are being displaced and have no choice but to move out. That's where we're at right now as a city. Just want to play a little bit more from Jamal Green real quick.
Joe Biden has allowed this crisis to get to this point. And the Texas and Republican governors said, okay, you guys don't want to deal with this crisis. We're going to bust them to the sanctuary cities. And now the mayors and governors of these sanctuary cities are opening their arms and opening our pocketbooks, our taxpayer dollars, when folks have been suffering in these neighborhoods for years and years and years to come. And what kills me is that everyone talks about their plight. When the Asians stepped up and said that folks were hating on them during COVID, they got an anti-Asian hate bill. When the Latino community steps up and says, we want support, they get support. When every group of people talk about their issues, somehow they get no pushback. But when black people step up for themselves and say, hold on, this is our land. We wanted something in this school for us, for our children. We wanted to make sure that our homeless people got housing. Then somehow they want to turn around and say we're xenophobic and we're anti-migrant. Black folks have never been anti-anybody, because if we were anti-anybody, we'd be anti the people that have done the most wrong to us all of these years. So when we look at the migrant crisis, you know, what's crazy about this is that they have opened up our pocketbooks with open arms to allow the migrants to come into our cities. And the poorest people in the city, they have to put more poor people. They're trying to dump them on top of the poor people that's already here and without resources, giving them the priority of our resources, the priority of housing, the priority of work permits, the priority of the jobs in the most distressed industries, the priority of healthcare, the priority of education. And the people who have been here are being just stumped over. And so, yes, people will have a problem with that. Yes, residents who are paying taxes each and every day, who have ancestors who have been treated like nothing in this country. Yes, they're going to have a problem with that. These people come over, right, the border, and they can use the asylum seeking law to come into America and get all of the resources.
Now, the problem is, too, especially for all the migrants that are coming into Chicago, here's another thing. In Chicago leads the nation with more lead water service lines than any other city. 409,000 of them must be replaced. We're number one. And quite recently, as I covered on, I think 2 days ago, I covered on the show, it turns out Chicago's not even on the EPA. That's right, the big one. We're not on that list of, hey, we need help. 409,000 in the city of Chicago. We have politicians that don't care. We have corrupt officials that don't care. They're willing to put migrants on toxic land. There is still heavy industrial facilities already polluting said neighborhoods. We have unchecked corruption, both in politics and through police brutality. We have lead in our drinking water, as I mentioned before, where our schools are shut down, our mental health facilities are half of them are shut down. We have so many things wrong in Chicago. And yet somehow, through virtual signaling, these Democratic politicians want to say, oh, we're a sanctuary city now, too. We can't take care of our own, because our politicians made it so. Chicago's not a sanctuary city. It's a neoliberal nightmare. Now, I don't know what's going to take for Chicagoans to start getting more actively involved in politics after generations have been burnt by the Democratic machine. This machine has systematically rigged the system. You know, you don't even have to really register as a Democrat to really run, but you have to become a Democrat at the end, though. But a lot of these politicians who are Democrats in the city council, I mean, what, do you think they care about liberal issues? No. They say they do, just like their counterparts in Washington, D.C. You think Democrats believe in anything they stand for? No, just like Republican politicians. We got to get money out of politics. We have to put in term limits. I know Chicago desperately needs to put in term limits because we don't have term limits for the mayor. We don't. We've had 2 mayors in Chicago's history serve for 20 plus years. And I hope you're sitting down for them, because the first one, Old Man Daley, the father, and then the son. So collectively, for 40 plus years, Chicago's been ruled over by the Daleys. We perfected feudalism here in this city. And now it's supposed to be a sanctuary city to help out others. In what world? In what world? Democrats, these feel-good points, is it worth it yet, or do you guys just like being smacked around? Because everyone across the city has been vocal about these refugee centers being put up, these tents being put up. No one's being informed about it. And it's one more burden that's being put upon the taxpayers here in the city. And yet our politicians don't care. Just another day in the Windy City.